going on out there, everyone? And thank y'all so very much for joining us here today on Expanded Perspectives with me, Cam Hale. And as always, in here ready to spit some madness is Big Philly Pilson.
How's it going, everybody? Yes, I'm here in Skeleton Studios. Looking forward to today's show.
Yeah.
Very interesting topic you've chosen to discuss.
Yeah.
I love things about strange coincidences and things like that. I love it, right? It makes the universe, seem more mysterious. Because we like to pretend we have everything figured out, everything's linear and everything makes sense. But then there's things like quantum physics, like it doesn't even make sense. You know,
I don't think I can even spell it.
I couldn't either, but it's reality is much more strange than we like to believe. So I like those kind of things. I enjoy the weather. It's not cold. It's been nice and feels like spring outside today. I don't know what happened
this week.
I'm sure it won't last for very long. And then I'm going to be going on a trip very soon to the mountains with my wife, and so that I'm looking forward to that. Some time away from work, time away from the children, time away from the cats. Everything about my normal day-to-day life. I want to get away. I think we're going to go to some hot springs up there, and we already got a spa treatment booked and everything, and some nice dinners, and just relaxing, right?
Nice.
I'm going to do some hiking. There's a site, a Navajo site I think I'm going to travel to, and it's someplace I'd always wanted to see, and I'll probably take some photography, some photos of it and stuff. Something like that would be cool. I love road trips like that. Especially when you don't have the little ones with you, where this one's hungry, now this one needs to use the restroom. You know, it's a real beating. If you can just get on the road by yourself or just with one other person,
just take off.
So much better. So much better. I wish I had one of those giant RVs, like those big, like.
I want a bus.
Like a Prevost, like one that's like a 600 grander. You know what I'm talking about?
Silver Eagle.
Those things are amazing. That would be so cool to have.
Well, I had told you, it's funny that you had come and told me about your trip, and I'm like, it just so happens that my wife had booked one a few weeks before that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the exact same place.
Yeah, as a coincidence, a strange coincidence.
Coincidence, exactly. To the exact same place. We're just going to be there. We'll be there when y'all get there, and we'll be there for a few days while y'all are there, but we're going to be there a little earlier. So, yeah, it's the exact same spot, the whole deal. So even on vacation, we still coincidentally bump into each other.
I think it's because we're like-minded or maybe hive-minded, right?
It's more hive-minded. Well, it's because it's one of our favorite places to go. But it's funny. Actually, I have a listener. I have a good friend now. And this person is one of those very dangerous people that's very attractive and very intelligent. And those are like very dangerous. I'm neither. So it's one of those things that I look at this person like, oh, my goodness. So, yeah. And this person I'm going to refer to as the gardener keeps sending me things that plant these seeds in my mind. And they sent this crazy. Dude, it's so great. This whole coincidental deal. I'll probably have you go ahead and plug the audio in on all this. But anyway, that's what sent it all down the road. And then after reading that and listening to all this coincidental stuff, that's whenever Kyle hit me with, hey, we're going out of town. I'm like, hey, we are. When you go? And then boom, turned out. So this whole thing was kind of meant to be.
Well, back to the gardener person? Like, what do they grow?
Nothing but ideas.
Oh, ideas. I guess.
They're the idea gardener. They just send you. We all have those people in our lives that are like, hey, look what I found. And they sent that. And you're like, where on earth did this come from?
Yeah.
And then it makes me go insane. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Speaking of going insane with something creepy, Brett, I got something here for you. Jeepers Creepers Gargoyle.
Okay.
You know, that always grabs us. We're big fans of the flying humanoids. We're big fans of the idea of the Jeepers Creepers flying around. This thing says confronts a cousin on a Missouri highway.
Okay.
This is from our homie Lon. He posted this up. Somebody sent this to him. A fellow named Edward from Kansas City, Kansas, relayed this to Lon. Now get a load of this. As Edward wanted to relay an encounter that he and his cousin had in the summer of 1999 between 10 and 11 p.m. local time. They're traveling southbound on I-49 towards Joplin, Missouri. Edward's driving. Said he couldn't recall the exact area, but they were not too many miles from Joplin. And he states that he noticed a tall figure quickly running from the direction of medium to his left. And I guess it's supposed to be like maybe the median of the car.
Yeah.
And it's directly in front of his car. Boom. Both he and his cousin observed this human-like being that they immediately said to each other looked like a gargoyle. The headlights illuminated the humanoid so well that both witnesses were able to get a good description of it. This is what they said. The gargoyle was at least 6.5 feet tall and had dark, leathery, hairless skin all over its body. Said the being looked towards the witnesses, and the face had a stark, flattened facial features with large, deep-set eyes. There were large wings that laid flat on its back. But were extended as it reached the other or right side of the highway. Edward believes the being had begun to ascend into the air and then up above the field. He also noted that he had no other comparison to make of the humanoid other than that of a gargoyle. But after he watched the movie Jeepers Creepers in 2001, he said that the humanoid was very, very similar to that creeper character. Now, both witnesses have kept quiet about the encounter until a few years later when Edward married his wife, and then he and his cousin they were all talking and ended up telling her about it. Said the witness seemed grateful that he could tell his story without someone thinking he was crazy. Lawn. So, look, Edward, you're not alone, man. There's been a bunch of gargoyle sightings.
Well, now that you say that, I wonder if there's a connection to like the Jersey Devil, things like that in that area. And the reason I say that is many, many moons ago when I was a young man, I played in a hockey tournament in Colorado. And the championship game, we played a team called the Joplin Devils.
Ooh.
And they're from Joplin, Missouri. I wonder if there's a lot of sightings in that area of that type of creature, and it's known as the Joplin Devil, or I wonder. I'd have to look into that. But
and
that's
so it begins, people. You've just heard the beginnings of a whole new segment. It's called, that's it, the Joplin, Missouri Devil.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Speaking of creepy, check this out. I'm sending you this experience, and you will be the second person I've ever told about this. The first person went back here the summer after I told him about this and has never talked to me about my story or his trip back there. We slowly lost contact over time, and I think this is the reason why. Cam, it was 1978, and I was elk hunting west of a town called Dubois, Wyoming. I was on my way back to town for a hot meal, some gas, and to restock my food supplies, as I was camping in a tent in the backcountry. I was on the highway going west of town, coming in, and found a man wearing only hunting shoes, a heavy shirt, and a goose-down vest. Now, in Wyoming, in the middle of October, then, this was definitely underdressed. The daytime temps were at a high in the 30s at best, and the nights were always down to single digits or even lower. Well, he got out on the road and started waving his arms wildly and begging me to stop. I saw his eyes had a trail of tears on his face, trailing down it on the dirt that was on it. I pulled over on the side of the road, and it was a deserted road at the time, to see what the heck this guy's problem was. I thought it might be a wreck on some icy spot of the highway. Little did I know this would change my thinking and the way I hunted by myself forever. He ran to the side of my pickup, and I could see he was very scared about something. He grasped the pickup and begged me, with tears in his eyes, to take him to town. I couldn't say no to this man. I asked him if he was in a wreck or something. He said, no, just please get me out of here. I need to go somewhere safe. I thought it odd that he would say this, and as I had my right hand on my pistol, because you guys never know, I told him to get in. He looked around at the tree line along the roadway and again ran to the passenger side of the pickup. As he was coming around the truck, I took the pistol in a side pocket, or I tucked it in a side pocket of the door, and he got inside. He locked his door and made sure the window was up, again watching the tree line. He said, "Go, please, could you just go?" I started back towards town, and then I noticed the scratches on his face, clothes, and hands. His whole body was visibly shaking. After we went a couple of miles, he somewhat slowed down on rechecking the tree line and passenger rearview mirror. I said, "Man, are you okay, buddy?" He stared at me for many seconds and then just broke down crying like a little kid. "Yeah, but I think I'm crazy, man. I just had something happen, and I ain't going back there for nothing. I hope the guys are okay." He composed himself some and started to explain. He said, "I'm hunting here with two buddies, and we always hunt below the Brooks Lake when we come to Wyoming. Usually we get elk or deer. Never go home skunked here. I just love it. I was going along a trail, and I had been on many times before, to get to a small overlook and sit a while. It was their turn to push the elk to me. I was almost there when I walked past this strand of trees close together, and on the other side was this huge lizard. It was standing easily over 6.5 foot tall. It was golden bronze in color, with a vest and short metallic-looking briefs on. I could tell it was a male, I guess, and he had a black thing in his clawed hand. Its eyes were like that of a cat's, and it had a tail. I just stood there with my rifle in my hands, across my chest, frozen. I didn't know what to do. I was looking into the face of death. I knew it. I coughed as a little, and its arm with the black thing came up so fast I could hardly see it. Something hit my whole body, from my feet to my head, and I fell back on the ground. I don't know if it flew or just the way I fell, but I was jerked backwards. It came slowly walking up to me, and I could hear it. It could only move my eyes slightly as it came into view. It just looked down at me, its mouth slightly open, making a low hissing sound, and its forked tongue slightly coming out of its mouth. Its head turned down, looking at me, and it did this for a few minutes. I could hear it breathing. I could see the nose holes working. I could see its chest, muscles tensing and relaxing all over its body. I was just frozen, looking up. I couldn't look at it directly, and I couldn't close my eyes either. Its expression never changed, only the eyes moved, sometimes slow, like sometimes so fast you could hardly see it. On its sleeveless shirt, it had a kind of 0 or O with a smaller, screwy offset Y or Z, I think. It finally walked away down the trail. I don't know how long I lay there. From the sun's movement, it was maybe a couple of hours. I could hear the forest sounds, the birds, the wind, the trees, and the animals going about their day like nothing happened. I would use my arms or legs to move, hell, even my fingers. When I could move every muscle in my body, it all ached, as I would like to explain, like after a long workout in a gym or something. I knew if I went downhill, I would come to the old creek bottom and hopefully not see him again. So I did that. I followed it to the canyon bottom and then to the road and to you. Thanks again. Don't make me get out. I took my coat off. I guess I forgot my rifle, my cap. I don't need them anymore anyways. I hope Jake and Bobby are okay. I heard something following me when I first got up. It was really heavy sounding and would stop whenever I stopped. And once or twice I could hear breathing, like it did kind of a raspy, wheezy sound. I would start running or walking again, but I couldn't rest. He told me which motel to let him off at, and I did. He thanked me many, many times as he got out and went into the office. I never saw that guy again. I thought about the fantastic story and wondered, man, is this even true? But maybe he was right. I didn't hear anything about someone having problems anywhere around town that fall. I asked about the man the next year at the motel, and no one seemed to remember him. And if anyone knew stories about this area, I didn't get too specific or anything. I didn't press it. My buddy, whom I was close to and explored stuff like this at every opportunity, was very interested in my story and the location. He took off up there the very next summer for a long weekend. I had to work, so I couldn't go. I didn't see him till a couple of weeks later. I asked him about it and what he found out. He looked at me and got very serious. He said, "Dude, don't go up there. Promise me." Okay, that's what I said. I could tell he meant it. I would go with this guy sometimes, and he was very analytical and professional when doing things like taping sounds at cemeteries, exploring ghost haunts, and others. He never acted scared at any time. I have never hunted or been on that side of the highway since then, but have talked to others who have seen large barefoot footprints and strange flying stuff or howls over the years in and around that Wind River Mountains area. I do like to read about the unknown and sometimes explore it, but if it just deals wrong from the start, I leave it alone. Now, whenever I hunt anywhere, I don't fear bears, wolves, or other people. I'm wary of what else might be out there. Thanks for all you do, your fellow hunting friend, Arnold. So he saw this reptilian lizard thing. Now, we've heard of other stories throughout the years about these extraterrestrials known as the reptilians, right? And they do seem bronze in color, copper in color. What is that? Is this a demon? Is it an alien? Is it a slee stack? What are they seeing? Is it something from a parallel universe? Like, that's why he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. It's like and he was able to see it. But a lot of times these people talk about being able to see something out of the peripheral. Yeah. Not directly. But in this case, he said he was paralyzed. He couldn't move his eyes. But it's so strange, like it's just out of view. I mean, it had an outfit on, a vest, a sleeveless vest.
Dude, that's my favorite.
With an insignia on there.
He's just yoked.
Zoltan.
Lizard man. That's right.
I don't know. Very strange story.
None of those feel like Fae stories like we discussed this past few times. None of it feels like Fae when they involve the lizard people.
It sounds insane.
It does, but look, ant people and lizard people, the stories have been around for thousands of years.
Yeah, I know.
That's very, very disturbing. Folks, let's take a quick break. When we get back from the break, I'm going to be discussing some odd, strange coincidences. Nothing too creepy, just a good all-around, man, that was weird. Let's take the quick break and check it out. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. All right, y'all, here we go for some odd, strange coincidences, I suppose. This is one of those topics that it changes with everyone, right? Like if I instantly say Bigfoot, everybody has an idea of what I'm saying. You can see it in your mind. When you bring up coincidences, it's almost like an experience that it's been not really proven, but studied quite a bit mathematically for what it's believed to where it's only basically important to those that have perceived it. That coincidences may or may not be a thing. It's another thing that I've read to where people have talked about with coincidences. You will perceive those that happen to you as more important or more strange than when someone tells you their coincidences. I'm not sure that's true, right? It is, if it's truly perceived or the way we perceive it is individualistic the way it is now, then you really could never measure this, as we know. But I will say this, coincidences are extremely unsettling at times, right? There's some very strange things that happen, whether we want to as with our mind, the way we try to perceive it, that we're actually the ones building it. I will tell you this. Here's a real quick little, I guess you can't say the definition, but this was something that was studied. In 1989, two mathematicians, Persi Diaconis and Frederick Mosteller, wrote a paper called Methods for Studying Coincidences. And in there, they have settled on this, that a coincidence is a surprising concurrence of events perceived as meaningfully related with no apparent causal connection. Just a fancy way of saying, hey, look, it just happened. We have no idea. I will say this, the more I've looked into it and reading more on coincidences and looking into these things, it will make you start believing heavily in the multiverse, right? Heavily in simulation theories. Like, makes you wonder, are we really, are we in a machine? Are we in something going on right now? Some of these coincidences are wild. Like I said, some of them not so much. Some of them may only be perceived as strange to you or to me or to those experiencing it. It also feels like there are certain things that we have manifested. It's almost as if, and we've, discussed this for years with these cryptids and these strange creatures that we know are reported on 4chan or reported on creepypasta or any of that have now made a sweep to where around the world people report seeing these. Now, is it everyone pulling each other's legs to continue with this? We don't know, right? The same as with coincidences. Do we make them out to be more than there are, or are there really something to it? Here's some strange things that go by with people that we've heard of or that you should know, and if not, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, to be exact. That's Mark Twain, for those that don't know. Of course, everybody probably knows, but Mark Twain. Mark Twain's born in 1835, the exact same year that Halley's Comet made its first appearance, right? The day, I guess I was aware of, but Halley's Comet comes swinging through the same year Mark Twain's born. No big deal. A lot of people born in 1835. A lot of people died in 1910, which is when Mark Twain died, which is also when the comet made its second appearance. Being born and dying in the year that Halley's Comet shows up. Pretty cool, right? May not be anything mind-blowing, but at the end, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool the way it kind of synchronicities, the way it clicks into gear. Another one that we're going to talk about, Stephen Hawking. Right? Stephen Hawking was, and I had no idea till reading into all this. I didn't study Stephen Hawking, right? Like, it's not one of those guys that I'm like, that guy's great. I remember reading some of his theories, listening to some of the stuff, but not really studying him for him. I haven't seen the movie. Not that diehard of a Stephen Hawking fan, right? But it was very interesting to learn that he was born on the 300th anniversary of Galileo's death. I'm sure there were a lot of people. But it is odd that Stephen bloomed from that, right? And what's even a little more odd than that is the fact that he passed away on what would have been Albert Einstein's 139th birthday. Really, really crazy. The craziest thing to me about this whole deal is how long he lived with Lou Gehrig's disease. Right? What an animal. Because most of the time, what is it? You start doing any kind of studying, what 3 to 5 years? When you get diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's, I'm sure there's other outliers, but it's not common. It's very rare. And he lived, I think 76, 75, 76 years old. That's a heck of a thing too. And the fact that he was funny, right? Like the dude might have been, but was funny. Also, here's another one. I got to roll the clock back. You start thinking about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Like, for all of you listening outside of the United States, it's probably not a big deal for y'all because y'all's countries are way older, but it's a big deal for us because our country's still relatively young compared to some of the others. So to think about American revolutionaries, that was a big deal for us, right? And it still is a big deal in history. You should check it out. It was a really wild time of what a lot of these men did. So you take two friends, right? Legit friends, brothers in arms that were standing up against the British Empire. And then over time, they drifted apart. Of course, what divided them? Politics, right? Politics and ideals separated these two fellas. Well, it got down to the very end of their run, and they were the last two of the surviving members of the American revolutionaries that were from the British Empire. They were the last two left. And the story goes that eventually one of them sent a letter to another one. And in that letter, I guess pretty much expressed his feelings, and the other one responded, and they became friends again, which is great. They passed the letters and, they wrote each other and kept each other. And I'm sure it would be great to see all these. The really strange thing is, though, that they both died within an hour or two of each other on the same day in 1826. The strangest part about it is it was on the 4th of July. So wrap your minds around that, American citizens. That is one heck of a way. America, right? You think you're American, you're never going to be that American. But now we're going to drift over to something a little crazier. This is something of a personal coincidence. There was a novelist, a woman that wrote children's stories. She wrote some great stories, Jack Frost, all of these things, right? That she didn't write Jack Frost. What I'm saying is she was a big fan of, but what got her into writing. Her name was Anne Parrish. You go back and study her, look at some of the stuff she wrote, was great, especially at the time she was doing. She was born in 1888, I believe. She passed away in 1957. You have to look at that window of time for a woman. She was doing a lot. Right? That was still a hard time for women, for everybody, pretty much. But women, y'all got a rough shake for sure, too. And at that time, she was killing the game. So there's a story goes that one of her favorite books, like I told you, that really got her into writing was Jack Frost and Other Stories. She loved those books, which is probably the reason that she was such an amazingly good children's book author. So she goes on. She was like, look, I don't have any of this stuff, so I'm going to go adult, and this goes on, leaves it, no big deal. Fast forward to where she's married, her and her husband are going to eat lunch, and she sees a bookstore, and she decides, you know what, I'm going to slip over to this little, well, it's like a little, little bodega, little stall there area, and she slips over there in it, and she's going through the books, and there she sees a book of Jack Frost and Other Stories. Boom, her heart explodes, she can't believe it, right? Oh my goodness, my favorite book as a child, one of my all-time most motivating things. This is what I'm going to get. So she buys this book for little nothing. Husband's already over here at the little cafe. She slips on over there with him, sits down. She's like, can you believe this? And she hands him the book. And he's like, this is the one, huh? This is it. And he opens it up and he almost drops it. Story goes, I can't believe it because inside the book is Anne's name and address. It was the book she had as a child. She had found and bought her favorite childhood book from herself. Had no idea, right? I can't imagine what that would have been like, to be like, not buying it. I have had one, though, where one of my children, a little backstory here, one of my children came home from the library here at the high school, I believe it was. Maybe one of the junior highs. I can't remember which one it was. And one of the books that they had checked out, you could go back and look at the card, and my name was on it from whenever I was in school. That's how few times that book had been checked out, right? Probably an old Lord of the Rings or there's no telling what it was. I don't even remember, but I remember laughing whenever we saw it. You want to talk about other crazy coincidences, we'll just pop in. All I'm going to say is The Simpsons, right? I had no idea. You start looking at stuff with The Simpsons, it will blow your mind. A little feel-good story. A professor in New Jersey named Royce Burton, okay? Was talking about back in the 40s. He decides one day that this is what he's going to do. He's like, hey, look, we're going to talk about this. He's teaching class, probably history if I'm betting. He says, hey, let me tell you a story about me when I was a young man. When I was a young man, I was a Texas Ranger. Not the baseball player. This is back in the 40s. I was a Texas Ranger. I was a law officer. And so he goes on that at one time he's down in deep South Texas. They're doing some things down there, and he's climbing out of a canyon. He loses his balance as he gets to the top, right? And he's kind of stumbling around, and another ranger there reached over and grabbed him, helped him on up, got him on up into safety, and was like, hey, dude, you okay? He's like, yeah, I got hot, a little disoriented. You know how things go. He's like, yeah. They become buddies at that moment, right? Boom, we're friends. They stay friends for the next few years until, World War II starts. Well, then they both go and enlist. So they move on, right? So as they talk about things like, hey, look, this guy saved me. We become great friends. This whole thing. So Joe was a diehard kind of guy and a really, really wonderful friend. And, I don't know what happened. Said, I have no idea. We signed up for military together, and then that was it. So, I don't have any idea. And he's sitting there telling this story, and the door opens up into his classroom, and Joe walks in. The coincidence of all coincidences, Joe had retired and gotten a wild hair and had tracked Royce down and decided to come see him, and just so happened to come see him and talk to him the day he's telling the story. Another little famous one for all of you baseball fans out there is Mr. Roberto Clemente, Pittsburgh Pirates right fielder. Amazing ball player, right? Amazing ball player. Became the first Latin American player to reach 3,000 hits, right? The first. Dude, beasting, 3,000 hits. Saddest thing about it was that was his last hit. The hit he made to make 3,000 hits, that was it. That was all of it, because Mr. Clemente was killed in a plane crash in Puerto Rico, right off the coast of Puerto Rico. He was also a huge humanitarian, spread the wealth around like crazy, took care of his people. He was on a trip to Nicaragua whenever he was killed in a plane crash. Another crazy thing, too, if you look back, someone had pointed this out, a wild coincidence was for Tolkien. Tolkien died in 1973. If you look at the One Ring backwards, it lays out what it was. 3 rings for the Elven King, 7 for the Dwarf Lords, 9 for the mortal men, and 1 ring to rule them all. Pretty strange, right? Pretty odd encounter. Well, not even encounters, just, well, I guess it could be an encounter in certain ways. And then there's just some strange ones there. Before we get into this one here, I'm going to tell you this real quick story. This story here kind of spoke to me in a way. My grandma, now everybody's had crazy coincidences, right? We've talked about it. Everybody has something odd or strange has happened to them. For as long as I can remember, I remember hearing this story from my grandmother, my father's mother. My grandfather had passed away when I was not quite 4 years old, but he had served 4 years in the Pacific Campaign in World War II. And during that time of him being gone, he never got to return home. I don't even know how it worked out, but he was meant to be out of the military literally 2 weeks per calendar date after Pearl Harbor. But because of Pearl Harbor hit, so he'd already been in and spent his year in and all this stuff, not thinking he was going to do anything. And then Pearl Harbor hits, and that's it. He's never, no more leave. I think the only leave he got was to go to Australia, something like that. It was not you know how it was, a hectic time, and everything's by steamship, or whatnot, as they're trying to get their big diesel engine. Anyway, During this time in the Pacific Campaign, he's writing my grandmother. They're not married at the time, but my grandmother had known him, they'd known each other for quite some time, and it was one of those deals that she was in love with him from the jump, and I think her as well. Typical, 1940s love story. So he writes her, and she gets a letter. Well, I'll back up and tell you. At one point, him and his unit and all the other men serving are stuck on an island, and it's looking pretty bleak. And so he writes her a letter telling her how much he cares for her, what's going to happen, and that she needs to move on. That by the time she receives this letter, he'll be dead. So, boom, throws it and writes it on whatever they write it on, tosses it in the mail, hands it to whoever, and they take it and go. And it pretty much, you can't give out the details, but it pretty much tells, this is what's going to happen. We're out of supplies. It's over. I love you. Fast forward 3 weeks, maybe almost a month. He survives it. He gets a chance to get out of this whole thing. Can't believe it. It's one of those where none of them, they all wrote those letters. Nobody expected to be out of it. My grandfather writes another one and tells her everything, again, of his feelings and the whole deal, and that he was alive. My grandmother received those 2 letters on the exact same day. It's still the craziest thing. She had them. My grandmother passed away when she was 93 years old. As far as I know, they're still in her things. She received both letters on the exact same day, reading the first, as you would, reading the first letter, devastated, and then reading the second letter, elated. The swing would be unbelievable, right? The emotional swing was unbelievable. When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother never remarried. That was her one and only. So, I tell you all this because of this story. It says that my grandmother was in her first year of high school in the U.S. there when World War II first started. So she said during this time, it was very common for the young soldiers, to toss scraps of paper with their names and addresses written on them onto the ground when they drove through cities, hoping that someone would pick up the paper and just write to them while they were deployed. Sounds like a pretty good way, right? Might need to think about that. Littering might get you a girlfriend or a boyfriend. Y'all better pay attention. All y'all out there, all the single lady, just throw your name and stuff. And that sounds like a horrible idea. But anyway, so it says that one day when my grandmother was working outside of a local little penny store, a convoy drove by. So she ran outside looking for scraps of paper, sees one, picks it up, runs in, gets it. She writes it all down and starts writing this soldier. And soon as the way it works, as they're going back and forth and learning about it, they kind of form a relationship. Several months go by, right? This is going on. One day, the grandmother's there at her all-girls Catholic school, gets a knock on the door. Principal comes in, says, "Hey, come out here for a second." She comes outside like, "Hey, guess what? There's a young soldier that's out here. Now, we won't let him come up, of course, because it's all girls, but he's here to see you. Is that cool? We want to, you can come down to the auditorium. We have a place set up, and it'll be supervised, of course. Come on down." She goes down. There's the soldier she's been writing, right? She's been writing to him for several months. They sit down, they talk. He confesses his love for her. He tells her how much he cares for her, but that he's got to go back. He's, this whole thing. He reaches in his pocket and he takes out a pocket watch. He says, "What I want you to do is wind this every night before you go to bed. And when this is over, I'm going to come back for you. And I'm going to love you as long as this watch ticks." And that's the way the story goes. And he leaves and he goes back overseas, back to the war, and they're continuing to write each other. I think y'all all know where this is going. One night, the grandmother says, "One night, get ready for bed," and I wind the watch, but it's not winding. Just stuck. That's it. Wind it. It doesn't do anything. So she decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to save up my money and I'm going to take it. I'm going to have this watch repaired. And then when he comes home, He'll be none the wiser, and I'll tell him, hey, look, this is what happened, and I had your watch fixed. I love you. 2 days goes by after this watch quit working. She tries it, every night. She keeps trying, nothing. She receives a phone call from the mother of the soldier, letting her know that he had been killed in battle 2 days before this phone call. Just so happens that the mom tells them, and it's the exact same time on the pocket watch. So the grandmother falls apart, right? She mails the watch back to the mom, gives it back to the soldier's mother. That's it. The whole thing, she's devastated, as you would be. 2 years go by. No big deal, right? She meets another young man. They eventually get married, have the family that they're talking with now. The strange thing about that is this young man's the exact same age as, or would have been, of course, the exact same age as the soldier that she had written to and had fallen in love with before. And this young man had the same first name, middle name, and last name as the deceased soldier also. That is pretty doggone crazy. Speaking of dogs, you want to talk about a crazy one? What is it with pets and coincidences? I don't know what's going on with that stuff too. They're dialed into a whole nother frequency as we talk about, right? Their senses, their levels, everything is completely different. Another one takes place on the 4th of July. The story goes that a dog escaped during the fireworks show. Always happens, right? Always happens. Dogs hate it. Dude, I don't blame them. Missing for a few days. The family goes and starts putting signs up all over town with this dog's picture. They get a phone call. Says, hey, we think we've got your dog. Hey, mister, I got your dog. That's a Silence the Lambs reference for all you young folk. So they jump in their car. Said it's about 3 miles down the road, and it's over, like, not really an interstate, but a large commercial road right there, right? Big, busy highway. So they're like, okay, let's go check this out. So they show up, hop out, going up. Sure enough, that's him. There he is. They're like, what do you know? Like, we got him, right? His name's Stan. They're like, that's our pup, Stan. Stan, come over. Stan comes over. He's going crazy. He's like, hey, there y'all are. I was just kind of scared. So they were like, all right. They said, hey, look, they love Stan, but they knew that they had to call whenever they found who had owned it because they lost their dog the exact same night. Exact same night, dog ran off due to the fireworks, and this one shows up, rotating pups. Next day, said a few doors down from the family, okay? So they go and pick up their dog, they come home. The very next day, they get a knock on their door. Their neighbor, elderly female neighbor, she lived about 2 doors down. She comes up and she's like, hey, I saw y'all's flyer. I think I got your dog. Black Lab, he's in my backyard. And they're like, no, we went and got ours. Like, we found our dog. So they said, everything's great, no big deal. But she's like, would y'all please come over? Like, this is him. So they're like, okay. Stroll down there. As they're strolling down there, they're like, hey, let's see if this is Norman, the people who had their dog. Sure enough, they turn the corner, start calling Norman. Here he comes. 3 miles apart across a busy highway, these two puppers crossed paths and decided to go hang out on the other sides of town with each other. Yeah. So they load up Norman, drive him over to there like, hey, look, you gave us our dog yesterday. We'll just bring your dog back again. Give them that. It's not just that of missing dogs, right? Crazy dogs running around. There are numerous tales, and I don't really know if you could call it coincidences, because with pets, it seems to happen a little too much. Like, they know a little too much. They're a little bit too keyed in. There's a story that goes that a best friend, 2 best friends, one of them had no one in their family, was dying, and asked, I hate to do this, but can I die with you? I want to be with someone I care for, a good friend, someone I know, this whole thing. So they let them. We're going to have hospice at the house. We're going to take care of everything. It happens quick, right? It's fast. So while this is going on, hospice is doing their thing. Said, hey, look, I'm sitting here with my best friend. I have a dog. I have a Great Dane. Great Dane's laying there on the ground by the bed. Hospice is there. Everything's going on. Said all of a sudden, the Great Dane's been asleep, right? Been out, nothing going on. The best friend drops into a coma, and as she's there at the end, they're monitoring her heart rate, all this stuff as it's going. They said all of a sudden, they're watching and they see the heart rate drop, the dog raises its head, stands up, raises his head, jumps up on all fours, standing there. A Great Dane, mind you, looks about 2 foot above the bed and watches its head move up towards the ceiling like it's tracking something. And then it barks one time, real low, little, and then lays back down like no big deal. That was it. The dog watched the soul leave the body. Now they said, look, either this is a complete and insane coincidence that this dog just happened to react to something, or it could see what we have always thought would go down. Here's another strange one. Well, and I say strange, this one seems to be a little bit more fun as far as a coincidence. When I tell you where this happens, there's nothing that sounds more New Zealand or more Australian to me than this story here. It says, my dad lives in a national park here in Australia. It's farmland that's grandfathered in. It's the remnants of a volcano that blew itself up very violently. So there's very hilly terrain. It says one day we're sitting out on the deck and we see a hang glider come down halfway down this valley, and it didn't look like a nice landing. Said it crashed. My dad goes, well, hell, we better go see if he's okay, right? And this thing said they don't land anywhere near here anyway. So they get in their car. What do they call them? Utes. We're going to get in our ute. And we drive the ute for about 10 minutes, and we're going to reach the spot, and we see it. And we see a fella standing in the middle of this pasture, said just by a very crashed, wrecked out hang glider. Said the dude's just staring. Said he looks around, he's just like, huh? As they pull up, the guy turns and looks at this kid's dad and says, well, I'll be damned. Says, Jack, is that you? And the guy, who hasn't seen his childhood friend for over 35 years, drops, of course, the F-bomb and says, Tim, is that you? They both grew up in New Zealand and found each other completely randomly in New South Wales, Australia, from a hang glider crash. Now, it's one thing, like everybody loves to joke, right? Like, oh, the world's a small place, right? All these things that you bump into. How many times of those of you that have been anywhere outside of where you would normally see someone, especially like if you're on vacation, right? And you see, oh, no big deal. And then you bump into people that you know. It's happened. People say, oh, that happens to me all the time. How crazy is that? Speaking of that crazy, this is one where a person tells a story. Said he heard a guy. I guess he's hanging out with some dudes. This guy tells a story. Said, you're never going to believe what happened to me one time. He says, I was on a holiday in Greece from the UK. Says, as I'm walking past a public phone, like a payphone, a big box payphone, he said, the thing starts ringing. Now, he's like, mind you, I'm in Greece. So laughingly, he's like, I'm doing it. Picks up the phone. It's his bank. His bank was calling him about some strange activity that they witnessed on his account. So the bank starts asking him questions, and he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Pump your brakes. Now, I got to remind y'all, this story is allegedly taking place in the 90s, okay? It's not a cell phone. Nobody's tracking anybody. They're just like, something's not right. I don't know how they knew his location. So he says, hey, how did y'all get this number? And the bank says, that's the number we have on file for you. He says, no, you don't. This is a public phone box. I'm in Greece, bro. So the bank starts looking at how did they call this number. Instead of dialing the phone number they had on file, they dialed his account number, which just allegedly just so happens to be a phone box in Greece that he was standing beside when they called. Whether it's real or not, it's a hell of a story, right? A hell of a story. I don't know. The whole thing just sounds crazy, but I love the way it pops out of there. Now, here's another one. And I don't know if you could really call it a coincidence, like they talk about a strange coincidence. I guess you could. This is one that this young fellow reports that says my mother and her family had been gathered around an uncle at his home who was terminally ill with cancer. And of course, he's there on hospice. He's dying at his home. That's it. Said so he was Catholic and he had always wanted, he wanted to receive his last rites. That was a main thing right then. So they said they have the priest come in. His breathing is extremely odd until the priest arrives. The priest gets there, gives him his last rites. Said he dies about 15 seconds after the priest finishes. Like he's holding on just to get those last rites. That's it. Last breath, nothing. They said about 30 seconds after he'd passed away, he took a deep breath, opens his eyes, turns to his wife, and very softly says, "I can't go yet. It's too busy," and slipped into a coma and then passed around 2 hours later. It wasn't until the next day that the family learned that that night was the bombing in Bali that killed so many people. It was literally 15 minutes after the first death. So after he died, that's when the bombing and all this stuff, and the line got too big, so he had to come back and wait, is what it sounds like. Coincidences, I don't know, right? I have no idea if you could consider that a coincidence, but it is extremely unnerving. Here is another one that a person writes that when I was 16 years old, I had driven to pick my little brother up from his soccer practice. And we're just chatting, and on the way home, he just changes. Everything about his demeanor changes, and he says, "Do you ever get the feeling your whole life's about to change?" Which was very strange for him. He's usually a happy-go-lucky kid, right? And so he's really just real cool about everything, and I'm the most emotional sibling of the group. He's real cool. So I'm like, look, I don't know. Things like, I don't know. It feels like nothing ever changes. And he looked me dead in the eye and said, something is about to. They pull onto the street, turn the corner, and out of the blue, he goes, "Feels like someone died." And at that point, I said, "What are you talking about?" As they turn the little bend, there's tons of cars in front of their house. Turns out their father had died at work that day, and he felt it. Now, saying that, different side of the grandparents, but I will tell you this. I was coming back from a hunting trip with my brother-in-laws, and we'd been up near Childress, Texas, and out of the blue, and this is, still cell phone days. This is probably back, I don't remember what year it was, whatever day it was, because I blocked most of that out, that my grandfather on my mother's side, he passed away. She was calling. My phone had no service, nobody else's, and the first phone that had service was one of my brother-in-law's. He flipped the phone over and he says, "Hey, look, it's weird, your mom's calling." And without missing a beat, I freaked everybody out in the car. I said, "Yeah, because it's my grandfather passed away." And they all kind of looked at me, answered the phone, and sure enough, and I can't explain that. To this day, I can't explain that feeling. But it was almost like a guarantee, like you already knew. It's like the outcome of a movie. When someone tells you, "Have you seen this movie?" and you can instantly think of the cool twist that movie hits you with, that's that feeling, is instantly in my soul. I knew it like I had seen it before. Very, very strange. I have no idea. I'm going to leave you with this. It says, my best friend was on a father-son fishing trip at Sioux Narrows, Ontario. I'm from North Dakota, and so were my friends and their families. Now, this is where there's a bridge that's apparently 50 to 60 foot above the water. So my friend was with another mutual friend who had gone on this trip, and those two had the tradition of jumping off this bridge into the water. And on this particular trip, my friend's father had a crazy dream that said if one of them jumped off, or in the dream, one of them, when they jumped, died jumping off this bridge. And it shook him, shook everybody, but it shook him up tremendously, to the point that he made everybody that was on the trip promise me you will not jump. The two friends ignored the warning, jumped anyway. As you guessed it, one of them never came up. The dream came true. The feeling was real. I tell you this because unlike a lot of things that we covered, this is just strange. It's odd, but it's fun. It's lighthearted. We don't get too deep. Yeah, there are some very strange coincidental connections. I don't know how I feel about them. I believe everybody experiences coincidences. And like I said before, if you truly start digging into something that is as mundane as coincidences, and it's funny that we call it mundane because we're all so used to it, when it's truly probably not as mundane as we would like to think it is. I can't say that there's more to it. I can't say that there's less. I can just tell you that the strangeness there is oozing out of this topic if you want to look around in there. But be prepared. It will make you get a little jumpy from point to point. And you start looking for things. And that, of course, is another problem. You could end up looking confirmation bias. You start finding reasons for things to be coincidences when they really aren't. But either way, I think this is something that we all share. We may not all have seen a UFO. We may not all see Bigfoot. We may not all experience the things we experience, but I believe everyone has experienced a coincidence, at least one, that they just can't quite explain. Folks, hope you enjoyed it. Let's take a quick one. When we'll come back, we'll kick it around and see if the coincidence kid's going to be what he'll be thinking about. You're listening to Expanded Perspectives. And there we go. Some wacky, wild coincidences.
Yeah. It makes you aware that they're probably, well, the scientists have already proven that the multiverse exists, right? And it's like layers bleeding into other layers.
Yeah.
That's why these things seem too fantastical, because it's like parallel timelines.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it feels like.
And it almost doubles down on it. Like I said before, everybody's experienced it. Everybody has experienced some little form of, man, that's weird. Like, how did that line up? That's weird. And like I said, in that study, of course, it's going to mean more to those that it's happened to, each person. But that can be said with everything. Everybody feels in their story, or whenever you're talking about any kind of experience, that your experience is more genuine than everyone else's because you yourself had it.
Right, exactly.
That's just how it works. But it is very, very strange sometimes the way some of this stuff does line up. Not necessarily scary or paranormal, that just weird. And then some of it lines up so much fun. Like sometimes you find some really fun things and you meet fun people through strange coincidences.
Yeah, I agree.
I love it. Just like the whole deal like we talked about with the vacation coming up. Neither one of us had spoken about it.
No.
At all. At none of it. And you brought it up and I'm like, yeah, my wife booked it too. And then we talk, you're like, oh my God. This is ridiculous. But yeah, this is the way normal things like that would end up kicking off and happening. Hey, have you ever had a coincidence that you would consider strange or one that sticks with you?
Man, let me think.
Not to put you on the spot.
No, I know. I'm sure I have. I probably need some time to think about it.
Yeah, I just didn't know if you'd ever had one, because sometimes you can ask a question and everybody's like, oh yeah, well, I've got this one strange thing.
Yeah, I'm sure there has been an event in my life, or more than once, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I'm sure it's happened.
And it's like I said, it's not necessarily paranormal. It's just odd things. Like even so much, I always think about this, like we used to discuss, when you would know someone was calling on the old home landline, right? And you would just instantly know, oh, hey, mom's calling. You'd pick it up, hey, mom, and it's exactly who it would be. Like you just got that feeling.
Yeah.
Right? Those were always very strange to me too. Almost like a little bit of premonition, a little foresight.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like phone calls from the dead sometimes, or people receive a phone call and it'd be staticky, and somebody a loved one is like, well, I just wanted to tell you I loved you, whatever. They hang on. Then it turns out the next morning they wake up, they realize that person expired.
Oh, yeah.
Like an hour before that phone call was made.
Well, even in a dream, I had read one where a young lady was talking about, she had a dream one evening and about her grandfather. And she said her and her grandfather used to be close. And then, of course, as time ago, they weren't as close as they were.
Sure.
And she said in this dream that her grandfather was a firefighter, retired firefighter. And in this dream, she said that she's standing like, in the funeral home. and there's a casket with the flag draped over it, the whole thing. All of the mourners, everyone there is crying and all this. And she looks over and her grandfather, and she knows it's her grandfather's funeral. Her grandfather is standing right beside her. And he told her he loves her. And then he turns and he walks towards the double doors like it looks like he was going in the back of the business. And he turned to her and he said, look, I love you, but you have to stay here. You can't follow me. And then turned and walked out. That was the dream she had. She wakes up the next morning like, man, I haven't thought about him in a long time. Like, that's kind of weird. Gets a phone call literally like from her mom 15, 20 minutes later. Your grandfather passed away last night.
Yeah.
I mean, just weird things like that.
Yeah, I think it happens more often than you think.
I do. I think it happens. I personally think small coincidences happen so often that people are so used to it. You're used to something little weird happening to certain people. Even in that study, they talk about the mindset of certain people that are more open, and they talk about it happening to certain people more than others.
Well, that makes sense. Some people are more perceptive.
Well, and it also goes back into those that we talk about that seem to have more paranormal encounters or brushes with something that you would consider paranormal more than others.
Very, very true.
So I have no clue. What I do have here for y'all is a very strange story out of one of Kyle's favorite towns in Ohio, Gallipolis. Gallipolis, Ohio. I'm pretty sure. I'm 99% sure that's how you pronounce this.
I'm 99% sure it's not.
That's how it is. It's Kyle's favorite town in Ohio. He used to like Columbus till he drove through Gallipolis. So here we go with the crazy story here of Kyle's favorite place. So this story's from a few years ago. Said, but my mother and I remember every single detail of what happened, but would like a little advice, right? We're not sure exactly what we saw. So when I was in about middle school, my mother and I were driving home one day. It was winter and a full moon because I remember the snow glowing under the moon. Now, it was only about 6 p.m., but it was really dark. I tell you what, it is awesome when there's a full moon and the snow's out.
Oh, yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah, it's amazing.
It is so cool.
I remember one time it was crystal clear, and I was in Crested Butte, Colorado, and there was full moon, and I'm saying the the light bouncing off the snow. Sorry, I can't speak. It was like it was like daytime.
Isn't it crazy?
It was amazing.
I love it. I love it. I like it when you go out there and then you start glassing. You start seeing elk. You start seeing stuff moving through there. Look, it looks great. So this is what it says. It says we're going about 55 miles an hour when this thing crosses and stops right in front of us. The only way I can describe it is that if you combined a deer, a dog, and a human. Now, it stood about as tall as our windshield. It had the legs, or the kind of legs that I can describe as deer legs. Its back was hunched over, and it was walking on all fours. It had the head of a dog minus the ears, but its eyes were white, and it didn't have a tail. The freakish thing about, I'm going to stop right here. That's the freakish thing now. The freakish thing about this creature was its skin. It wasn't a canine with mange or anything. It had actual human skin all the way down its legs, too long to be dog legs. It had a rotting meat odor, and some parts of the flesh were broken apart like you would scrape your knee. It was pale white, and you could see its veins. This thing was fast. It stood there and then just ran across the road in a blink of an eye. My mom had to pull over to calm down, but we both saw it. Now, was this a crawler? I don't know. This was in southeastern Ohio near Gallipolis, Ohio, Kyle's favorite town.
These stories are getting stranger and stranger. I mean, like, what could that be?
Well, you start,
I mean, obviously it's not a real thing.
No, it's not like a normal creature you just see running around and outside of Gallipolis.
That's what I'm saying. Somebody's had a crazy hallucination, but what's causing it?
The hallucination?
Yes.
Drugs.
I don't know, but it's getting creepy.
Well, my thing is this here. There's arguments online when you start talking about crawlers, okay? This breaks way off of everything. It's an argument, is it a crawler or is it a skinwalker? Now, the skinwalker groups, the people are real adamant, are like, that's a whole different thing, and it's only in the Southwest.
Correct.
Because of where it comes from, right? Native witch doctors or native shaman that transform, do all this stuff. Then you start getting into crawlers. Now, crawlers are thought to have been originally released upon the internet on 4chan. There's a whole group of people that they said, hey, look, this is all made up. Conveniently after the crawler stories come out, hey, by the way, we made it all up. And they have it down there to it. But again, it's almost like a manifestation of our fears of all this hive mind have collectively built these things, because now we get all kinds of crazy stories, right? The stories of crawlers are routinely coming in from around the globe now that you find. It's almost like this is something along those lines too, is it's a greater fear.
Yeah, I think it's demonic. I think it's
fear-based.
I mean, what do they tell you? I mean, the devil is cunning, right?
Yeah.
It knows this demon or whatever it is. It knows your fears. The person that saw this obviously knows what rakes are. So they've read stuff about rakes. They've been on creepypasta or wherever they've been, and it knows inherently what scares you, and it manifests itself in that form to terrorize you. These things get pleasure off your fear, right?
That's what it feels like.
To me. If you're scared of werewolves, it's going to manifest itself as a werewolf. If you're scared of clowns, it's going to manifest itself as a clown.
Or it routinely manifests itself in this rake-looking character because everyone is uncomfortable by that.
It's true.
It doesn't matter whether you know exactly what it is or not. If you saw something built the way they're built, in pale, torn human flesh, and the way it moves, instantly you're uncomfortable. You're on edge. Nobody's like, oh, man, that's actually my favorite scary monster, right?
No.
Like we talked about, people would love to see Bigfoot. Nobody clamors to go see the rake or a crawler. Nobody's looking for that kind of action.
They need to make a movie about the not deer rake thing.
They probably have.
I haven't seen any. Of course, I don't watch horror movies.
That's true. You have to ask your wife if they've made any.
Yeah, Luke and her would know.
And like we've discussed, too, a lot of people have, come to the defense of not deer, saying that stuff's not true. It's all deer with CWD. And you can go and look at the effects of CWD, chronic wasting disease. And there's a lot of the stories that do fit it. But then there's also some that don't fit any of that. Like there's not, as much as the skeptics and everyone, all the naysayers wish you could pile it in one pile, you can't. Right. You can't pile anything. You can't broad brush anything in this world. Definitely not these weird one-off stories that we get, which are definitely some weird one-off stories. Do you want to hear another coincidence?
Sure.
You want me to hit you with another one of those? Let me pull this bad boy up. So it says here that this person was taking some pictures at a cemetery for their class, had some friends there modeling, right? Mm-hmm. A little art class going on. So I said, one of my friends, I said, hey, I'm going to sit over and get this camera set up just right. Can you fake cry? I need you to kind of give me a good fake setup, right? Like you're tore up. So she starts crying and she's doing a great job. So I take a couple of pictures before I realize that she's looking at a big family grave. And on this family grave are the exact names of her relatives. There was the name of her father, her mother, sisters, and brother. All had the exact same name and last name. So it's probably pretty easy to cry, right? Now, her family lives in a whole other state and are alive. There's no problem whatsoever. So that was really pretty spooky. So later on, they get back in the car. They get done with all this stuff. They start heading back. They've got their little device plugged in, USB, music as it's playing, and they're going down through there. Said this song comes back around for like the third time. Nobody's changed it. Same playlist playing through. And all of a sudden, there's a little staticky sound. And in the song, you hear, "Get back from where you came from." Whoa. And then the song, it turns back into the song, picked right back up where it left off in this very creepy, staticky voice. Said they were both so creeped out, they had to pull over and stop, check all the stuff. They went back and re-listened. The whole deal, that wasn't it. They don't know if that was a paranormal coincidence, if it was there crying, like maybe they were making fun of or felt like they had insulted the spirits of this area.
Wow.
Somehow that I don't know, but somehow it linked them to it, right? So either way, it is a very abnormal coincidence. Yeah. First of all, could you imagine seeing that randomly? You've driven
no, I couldn't.
An hour or two from home. You're like, I'm going to take some photos of this cool, creepy old cemetery. You jump out, you go over there with some friends of yours and look, and there is your entire family.
No, that's
their names, and they're fine. That would creep me out to no end. I'd be like, what is going on here?
Yeah, that is.
Because what's not just the odds of one, right?
Right.
But everyone and the last name. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very strange.
Odd coincidence.
If you have any strange stories you'd like to share with me and Cam, you can email the show, expandedperspectives@yahoo.com. You can call the show, 888-393-2783. Let's not forget about our wonderful sponsor, Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are designed by over 150 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Now, here's the special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners. You got to go to babbel.com/expanded. Get 55% off babbel.com/expanded. That's BABBEL.com/EXPANDED. Cam, what do you got planned for the rest of your week?
Man, oh man, with this nice weather, I'm going to be outside getting a bunch of stuff done around here that I couldn't get done during the rain.
I'm going to wash my car. It hasn't been washed in like a month because it's been nothing but rain and snow.
It's time for that, huh?
Yeah.
You'll do it and then the rains will come back.
Sure, absolutely.
But you know what? Go for it.
Right, that's about all the time we have for this week's show. Till next time, folks, be safe. I'm Kyle. He's Cam.
Peace, y'all.